behind the gleaming smile and razor-sharp wit that captivated America for 30 years, Johnny Carson harbored a secret that would shake the very foundation of late-night television. On a seemingly ordinary night in 1979, when the camera stopped, rolling and the studio lights dimmed, something happened that would forever change the man who defined an era. What transpired in those invisible moments between taping and silence wasn't just a personal revelation. It was the moment that transformed Johnny Carson from America's favorite host into something far more complex, vulnerable, and ultimately human. For decades, Johnny Carson stood as an untouchable titan of American entertainment, his nightly presence in millions of homes creating an intimacy that felt almost sacred. From behind his iconic Tonight Show desk, Carson wielded a particular brand of Midwestern charm mixed with sophisticated wit that made him seem simultaneously approachable and untouchable. America saw him as their perfect late-night companion, the man who could make them laugh away the day's troubles with a perfectly timed joke or a raised eyebrow that spoke volumes at what the cameras never captured, what the studio audience never witnessed. Were the moments when the curtain fell and the real Johnny Carson emerged from behind the carefully constructed persona. Those who worked closest to him began to notice something unsettling. The man who could effortlessly connect with millions of strangers seemed increasingly disconnected from those who knew him best. His staff whispered about mood swings, about a growing isolation that seemed to deepen with each passing year of success. The truth was that Johnny Carson had become a prisoner of his own perfection. Every night, he stepped into a role so flawlessly crafted that it had begun to eclipse the man beneath. The pressure to maintain this facade was crushing, though he bore it with the stoic determination of his Nebraska upbringing. Little did anyone know that this mounting tension was building toward a breaking point that would shatter everything America thought they knew about their beloved host. The stage was set for a revelation that would come not during the show's most watched moments, but in the shadows between performance and reality. By 1979, Johnny Carson wasn't just a television host, he was an institution. The Tonight Show had become America's nightly ritual, and Carson bore the weight of that responsibility like a crown made of lead. Every joke had to land perfectly. Every interview had to sparkle with wit. Every monologue had to capture the zeitgeist of the moment. The pressure wasn't just professional. It was deeply personal, rooted in Carson's own perfectionism and his fear of disappointing the millions who invited him into their homes each night. Behind the scenes, those closest to Carson began to witness the toll this pressure was taking. His longtime producer, Fred de Cordova, later revealed how Carson would pace nervously before each show, chain-smoking and obsessing over every detail of the evening's performance. The man who appeared so effortlessly confident on camera was, in private moments, consumed by doubt and anxiety. His marriages suffered under the strain of his emotional unavailability. His children felt the distance of a father who gave everything to his audience and had little left for his family. The entertainment industry's golden boy was slowly crumbling under the weight of his own success. Carson had achieved everything he'd ever dreamed of, yet found himself feeling more isolated than ever. He confided to close friends that he sometimes felt like he was performing even when the cameras weren't rolling, unable to distinguish between the character he played and the person he actually was. The line between Johnny Carson the performer and Johnny Carson the man had become so blurred that even he couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. This internal crisis was building toward an inevitable confrontation with his own humanity, one that would come when he least expected it. October 15th, 1979, began like any other taping day for The Tonight Show. Carson arrived at NBC's Burbank studios with his usual professional demeanor, greeting staff with the courteous distance that had become his trademark. The show's lineup that night featured guest interviews, with established stars and up-and-coming comedians, nothing out of the ordinary. That would suggest this evening would be any different from the thousands that had come before. The studio. Audience filed in with their familiar anticipation. Ready to be entertained by America's favorite host. The taping proceeded flawlessly, as it almost always did. Carson's monologue hit its marks. His banter with Ed McMahon felt natural and spontaneous, and his interviews with the evening's guests sparkled with the kind of effortless chemistry that had made him legendary. To everyone watching both in the studio and later on television, it was another perfect Tonight Show performance. Carson had once again delivered the comfort and laughter that America expected from him, maintaining the impossible standard he had set for himself over the years. But as the familiar strains of the Tonight Show theme music faded and the studio lights dimmed, something unprecedented happened. Instead of his usual quick exit to his dressing room, Carson remained seated at his desk, staring out at the now empty studio seats. The audience had filed out, chattering excitedly about the show they'd just witnessed, but Carson seemed frozen in place. What happened next would be witnessed by only a handful of people, yet its impact would ripple through the rest of his career and ultimately change how he approached both his show and his life. The perfect facade was about to crack in the most unexpected way. Ed McMahon, Carson's loyal sidekick and the man who knew him better than almost anyone, was the first to notice something was wrong. As he later recalled in private conversations with close friends, Carson's usual post-show routine had been disrupted. Instead of the quick, professional exit that characterized the end of every taping, Carson sat motionless at his desk, his hands folded in front of him, staring into the empty studio with an expression McMahon had never seen before. It was as if Carson had suddenly awakened from a long dream and found himself in a world he no longer recognized. Doc Severinsen, the Tonight Show's band leader, was packing up his trumpet when he noticed the unusual silence on the set. Normally, the post-show atmosphere was filled with the busy chatter of crew members, breaking down equipment and staff, discussing the next day's preparations. But on this night, an eerie quiet had settled over stage one. When Severinsen looked toward the desk, he saw Carson still seated there, seemingly unaware that the show had ended. The normally effervescent bandleader approached cautiously, concerned for his longtime colleague and friend, a camera operator named Bill, who had worked on The Tonight Show for over a decade. Later described the scene to his family as the most unsettling moment of his career in television. He had been preparing to move his camera equipment when he noticed Carson's stillness. What struck him most wasn't just Carson's physical immobility, but the profound sadness that seemed to emanate from him. It was as if the weight of 30 years in show business, of being Johnny Carson every single night, had suddenly crashed down on him all at once. These witnesses would carry the memory of what they saw next for the rest of their lives, bound together by their shared observation of a moment that revealed the human being behind America's most beloved television personality. Happened next shattered every preconception about the man who had become synonymous with late-night television. Without warning, without any apparent trigger, Johnny Carson, the master of composure, the king of cool, began to weep. Not the controlled, camera-ready tears of a performer, but the raw, unguarded sobs of a man who had been holding back a lifetime of pain and isolation. Those present later described it as watching a dam burst, as if decades of suppressed emotion came pouring out all at once. Ed McMahon, despite his shock, moved instinctively to his friend's side. In all their years together, through countless shows and countless personal trials, he had never seen Carson so completely vulnerable. Carson's words, when they finally came, were barely audible. "I don't know who I am anymore, Ed. I don't know where Johnny Carson ends and the show begins." It was a confession that revealed the existential crisis that had been building. Beneath Carson's perfect exterior, the realization that he had become so consumed by his public persona that he had lost touch with his authentic self. The small group of witnesses stood frozen, unsure whether to offer comfort or give Carson space to experience this unprecedented moment of vulnerability. Doc Severinsen later said it felt like watching a statue come to life, suddenly revealing that it had been flesh and blood all along. Carson's breakdown lasted only a few minutes, but in that brief span, everything changed. The man who had spent decades making others feel less alone had finally acknowledged his own profound loneliness. When he finally looked up, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, it was as if he was seeing the world and himself for the first time in years. The moment would mark the beginning of a transformation that would subtly but significantly alter the trajectory of the Tonight Show and Carson's approach to his craft. In the immediate aftermath of Carson's emotional breakdown, an unspoken agreement formed among those who had witnessed it. No one needed to say it explicitly. They all understood that what they had seen was not meant for public consumption. America's relationship with Johnny Carson was built on trust, on the belief that he would always be there with a smile and a joke to end their day. To reveal his moment of vulnerability would shatter that trust and potentially destroy the very thing that brought comfort to millions of people every night. Ed McMahon took the lead in ensuring Carson's dignity remained intact. With the protective instincts of a true friend, he quietly approached each person who had been present, not to explicitly ask for their silence, but to remind them of what Carson meant to the country. His message was clear without being threatening. Johnny Carson had given everything to American television, and they owed it to him to protect this moment of human frailty. The camera operator, the stagehands, Doc Severinsen each understood that they held a piece of Carson's humanity in their hands, and they chose to guard it carefully. But the silence came with its own weight. These witnesses found themselves carrying a secret that fundamentally changed how they viewed their colleague and friend. They began to notice things they had missed before, the way Carson's smile sometimes seemed forced during particularly difficult interviews, the way he would linger alone in his dressing room after especially successful shows, as if success itself had become a burden. The knowledge of his vulnerability made them more protective, more aware of the immense pressure he carried every single night. They became unwitting guardians of both Carson's public image and his private struggles, creating a cocoon of loyalty around a man who desperately needed to know he wasn't completely alone. This pact of silence would hold for decades, only breaking years after Carson's death, when those involved felt enough time had passed to honor both the man and the moment that revealed his deepest humanity. In the days and weeks following his breakdown, those closest to Johnny Carson began to notice subtle but significant changes in the man they thought they knew completely. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden. Carson was far too professional and private for that, but it was unmistakable to those who worked with him daily. There was a new gentleness in his interactions with staff, a patience that hadn't been there before. The man who had once maintained careful distances seemed to be making an effort to genuinely connect with the people around him. Ed McMahon observed the most significant changes during their pre-show preparations. Carson, who had always been focused solely on the night's performance, began asking about McMahon's family, his concerns, his life beyond the show. These weren't the polite inquiries of a colleague, but the genuine interest of someone who had realized the value of human connection. Carson began staying later after tapings, not out of perfectionism, but to spend time with his crew and staff. He started remembering birthdays, asking about sick relatives, showing the kind of personal interest that revealed a man trying to reconnect with his own humanity. Perhaps most tellingly, Carson's approach to his interviews began to shift. While he maintained his legendary wit and timing, there was a new depth to his conversations with guests. He seemed more willing to explore serious topics, more interested in the person behind the celebrity facade. Guests began commenting on Carson's unexpected vulnerability, his ability to create genuine moments of connection that went beyond mere entertainment. The man who had spent decades performing the role of Johnny Carson was finally allowing glimpses of his authentic self to emerge, creating a richer, more complex version of the host America thought they knew. This transformation would subtly reshape The Tonight Show, making it not just funnier, but more emotionally resonant and genuinely human, while the audience at home remained blissfully unaware of the seismic shift in their beloved host's personal life. Regular viewers of The Tonight Show began to notice subtle changes that they couldn't quite identify. Carson's monologues retained their sharp humor, but there were moments of unexpected warmth, instances where he would pause and seem to genuinely savor the connection with his audience. His famous double takes and reaction faces began to feel less calculated and more spontaneous, as if he was rediscovering the simple joy of making people laugh. The most significant change appeared in Carson's handling of guests who are struggling or nervous. Previously, while always professional, Carson had maintained the slight distance of a master craftsman focused on creating good television. Now, there was a palpable empathy in his interactions with comedians having rough sets, actors promoting difficult projects, or anyone who seemed to be having an off night. He began using his platform not just to entertain, but to genuinely support and uplift the people who appeared with him. This shift was particularly noticeable with young comedians, whom Carson began treating with a paternal warmth that launched many careers and created lifelong loyalty. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere of The Tonight Show began to evolve as well. Carson's newfound willingness to be vulnerable had a ripple effect throughout the production. Staff meetings became more collaborative, with Carson genuinely seeking input from writers and producers rather than simply approving their suggestions. He began sharing stories from his own struggles with comedy and life, creating an environment where creativity could flourish without the fear of judgment. The show's quality didn't just maintain its high standards, it actually improved, becoming more authentic and emotionally rich. What America was watching, without realizing it, was the rebirth of an entertainment legend who had finally learned to balance his public perfection with his private humanity. The small group of people who witnessed Johnny Carson's breakdown found themselves forever changed by the experience. Ed McMahon, already Carson's closest professional ally, developed an even deeper protective instinct toward his friend and colleague. He began watching for signs of stress or emotional exhaustion in Carson, ready to step in with support or simply a listening ear. Meet Mahon's own approach to their on-air chemistry evolved as well. He became more attuned to Carson's emotional state during tapings, ready to provide extra energy or comfort when needed. Doc Severinsen found that the experience fundamentally altered his understanding of celebrity and success. As someone who had achieved his own level of fame as the Tonight Show bandleader, Severinsen had always assumed that Carson's confidence was as genuine as his own. Witnessing his colleague's vulnerability made him more aware of the isolation that can come with public recognition. He began making more effort to connect with Carson personally, often staying after tapings to share a drink and conversation, helping to combat the loneliness that had driven Carson to his breaking point. The crew members who had been present that night became an unofficial support network, each taking small actions to make Carson's work environment more comfortable and less isolating. They began paying closer attention to his moods, offering small gestures of friendship and respect that acknowledged his humanity rather than just his star status. The camera operator who had witnessed the breakdown later said it taught him that even the most successful people can be deeply lonely, a lesson that changed how he interacted with everyone in his life. These ripple effects created a more compassionate, understanding environment around The Tonight Show, one that allowed Carson to continue his legendary career while feeling less alone in his success. The moment of vulnerability had not only transformed Carson himself, but had created a community of people committed to supporting the man behind the legend. For over 3 decades, the story of Johnny Carson's breakdown remained one of television's best-kept secrets. The witnesses to that transformative night carried their knowledge like a sacred trust, understanding that what they had seen belonged to Carson alone. Even as Carson's career continued to flourish and his legend grew, those who knew the truth about his moment of vulnerability remained silent. They watched as America continued to see Carson as the unflappable king of late night, never knowing that their beloved host had experienced a profound crisis that ultimately made him more human, more relatable, and more genuinely caring. The silence became even more poignant as Carson entered his final years on The Tonight Show. Viewers began to notice a warmth and depth in Carson's performances that seemed to grow richer with time, but they attributed it to the natural evolution of a master entertainer rather than understanding it as the result of a transformative personal breakthrough. Carson himself never spoke publicly about that night in October 1979, maintaining his characteristic privacy about his inner life. Even as he became more open and vulnerable in his professional relationships, it wasn't until after Carson's death, in 2005, that the first hints of the story began to emerge. Ed McMahon, in his later years, began sharing carefully chosen details with close friends and fellow entertainers, always emphasizing how the experience had revealed Carson's fundamental decency and humanity rather than any weakness. Doc Severinsen, in interviews about his time with The Tonight Show, would sometimes allude to moments when Carson showed unexpected vulnerability, though he never revealed the specific details of that October night. The full story remained protected, a testament to the loyalty and love that Carson inspired in those who truly knew him. Only now, decades after that pivotal moment, with all the main witnesses having passed away or reached the sunset of their careers, can the complete truth finally be told. It's a story that doesn't diminish Johnny Carson's legend, but rather illuminates the human courage that made his greatness possible. The pressure to be Johnny Carson every single night for 30 years extracted a price that the public never fully understood. Behind the effortless charm and perfect timing was a man who had sacrificed enormous pieces of his personal life to maintain the illusion of effortless perfection. His marriages suffered under the weight of his emotional unavailability. His children grew up with a father who was beloved by millions, but often felt distant and unreachable at home. Carson himself was aware of these costs, but felt trapped by the expectations of his audience and his own perfectionist nature. The entertainment industry of the 1970s offered little support for performers struggling with the psychological pressures of fame. There were no therapists specializing in celebrity mental health, no understanding of the unique challenges faced by those who live their lives in the public eye. Carson was expected to be on whenever he appeared in public, to always be ready with a quip or a smile, to never show weakness or uncertainty. This constant performance became a prison of his own making, one that he maintained through sheer force of will and professional dedication. What made Carson's situation particularly tragic was that his greatest strength, his ability to connect with audiences and make them feel comfortable, had become the source of his greatest pain. The more successful he became at creating intimacy with millions of strangers, the more isolated he felt from the people in his actual life. His breakdown in 1979 represented the moment when this paradox became too painful to bear, when the man who made everyone else feel less alone finally confronted his own profound loneliness. The cost of being America's perfect host was nothing less than pieces of his own soul, sacrificed nightly on the altar of public expectation and personal ambition. Following his emotional breakthrough, Johnny Carson entered what many consider the most creatively fulfilling period of his career. The years between 1979 and his retirement in 1992 saw Carson at his most genuine and emotionally available, creating television moments that transcended mere entertainment to become genuine cultural touchstones. His interviews became deeper, his comedy more personal, and his connection with audiences more authentic than ever before. America was witnessing the full flowering of Carson's talent, enhanced rather than diminished by his willingness to embrace his own humanity. Carson's approach to hosting evolved to include moments of genuine spontaneity and emotional truth that had been missing from his earlier work. He began sharing more personal stories during his monologues, allowing audiences to see glimpses of the man behind the performer. His famous Karnak the Magnificent sketches became more playful and loose, his interactions with Ed McMahon more genuinely affectionate. These changes were subtle enough that most viewers couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed, but they could feel that something had deepened in Carson's performances. Perhaps most significantly, Carson's relationship with his audience transformed. From one of professional entertainer to beloved friend, the distance he had once maintained to protect his privacy began to close, replaced by a warmth that made viewers feel like they were truly welcome in Carson's television living room. His final years on The Tonight Show were marked by some of his most memorable moments, from his emotional farewell to the series, to his touching tributes to deceased friends and colleagues. The man who had once feared showing weakness had discovered that authentic emotion was actually his greatest strength, creating a connection with audiences that transcended the typical relationship between performer and viewer. The ripple effects of Johnny Carson's breakdown extended far beyond his own career, ultimately influencing how television personalities approach their craft and their relationship with audiences. Carson's evolution from untouchable perfectionist to vulnerable human being helped pave the way for a more authentic style of hosting that would influence generations of entertainers. Future talk show hosts would look to Carson's later years as a model for how to balance professionalism with genuine human connection, creating space for both comedy and meaningful conversation. The entertainment industry began to recognize the importance of supporting performers' mental health and emotional well-being, partly as a result of witnessing Carson's transformation. While the change was gradual and often insufficient, the understanding that even the most successful entertainers are human beings with emotional needs began to take root in Hollywood culture. Carson's example showed that vulnerability could be a source of strength rather than weakness, that audiences actually craved authentic connection more than polished perfection. Perhaps most importantly, Carson's experience demonstrated that it's never too late for personal growth and transformation. His willingness to confront his own emotional isolation and make changes in his approach to life and work proved that even established legends can evolve and improve. The years following his breakdown were not only some of his most professionally successful, but also some of his most personally fulfilling. He developed deeper friendships, became more present in his family relationships, and found ways to use his platform for genuine good rather than mere entertainment. The secret of that October night in 1979 became the foundation for Carson's most meaningful achievements, both personal and professional. It was the moment when America's most beloved entertainer stopped being perfect and started being real. When Johnny Carson announced his retirement from The Tonight Show in 1991, the official explanation focused on his desire to spend more time with family and pursue other interests after 3 decades of nightly television. While these reasons were certainly true, they didn't tell the complete story of why Carson chose to step away at the height of his powers and popularity. Those who knew about his 1979 breakdown understood that his decision to retire was also connected to the profound self-awareness he had gained from that transformative experience. Carson had learned to recognize the signs of emotional exhaustion and isolation that had led to his breaking point. As he approached his later 60s, he became increasingly aware that maintaining his television schedule was requiring more emotional energy than he wanted to give. Unlike his earlier years, when he had been driven by perfectionism and the fear of disappointing his audience, Carson now understood that his own well-being was equally important. The man who had once been willing to sacrifice everything for his career had learned to value his own mental and emotional health. His retirement, viewed through the lens of his 1979 experience, was actually an act of tremendous courage and self-knowledge. Rather than pushing himself until he faced another breakdown, possibly a more public one, Carson chose to leave while he was still at his peak. He had learned that true strength sometimes means knowing when to step back, when to prioritize personal happiness over professional achievement. His final Tonight Show performance was infused with the wisdom he had gained from his moment of vulnerability, a graceful exit that honored both his career and his humanity. Those who had witnessed his breakdown saw his retirement as the completion of a journey that began that October night in 1979. Carson had evolved from a man trapped by his own success into someone who understood the importance of balance, of knowing when enough was enough, of choosing personal fulfillment over public expectation. In the end, Johnny Carson's greatest gift to America wasn't his impeccable timing, his sharp wit, or even his 30 years of nightly entertainment. It was his demonstration that vulnerability and strength can coexist, and admitting weakness can actually be the foundation for genuine human connection. The man who broke down in private in 1979 became the entertainer who could create authentic moments of joy and comfort for millions of people. Precisely because he had learned to accept his own humanity, Carson's journey from isolated perfectionist to emotionally available human being mirrors the journey that many Americans face in their own lives, the struggle to balance public expectations with private needs, the challenge of maintaining authentic relationships while pursuing professional success, the difficulty of admitting weakness in a culture that celebrates strength. His example, though known to only a few during his lifetime, offers a powerful lesson about the importance of emotional honesty and the courage required to change, even when change seems impossible. The story of that October night in 1979 reveals that our most beloved entertainers are, ultimately, just human beings struggling with the same fears and challenges that affect us all. Carson's breakdown and subsequent transformation remind us that true strength comes not from never falling down, but from getting back up and allowing the experience to make us more compassionate, more connected, and more genuinely ourselves. His legacy isn't just the laughter he brought to millions, but the proof that it's possible to acknowledge our deepest vulnerabilities and still find ways to bring joy and comfort to others. Johnny Carson's final gift was showing us that behind every perfect performance is a real person, and that person's struggles and triumphs are what make the performance truly meaningful. The off-air moment that redefined Johnny Carson remains one of television's most profound untold stories. A reminder that our greatest entertainers carry the same human struggles that touch us all. What happened in that empty studio on October 15th, 1979, didn't diminish Carson's legend. It completed it, revealing the courage and vulnerability that made his later career so genuinely touching and authentic. Carson's story teaches us that true strength isn't found in perfection, but in the willingness to acknowledge our imperfections and grow from them. The man who made America laugh every night for 3 decades learned that his greatest achievement wasn't entertaining millions, but finding the courage to be genuinely human in a world that demanded nothing less than perfection. What aspects of Johnny Carson's hidden journey resonate most with your own experiences? How do you balance the expectations others place on you with your own need for authenticity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's honor Carson's legacy by continuing the conversation about the courage it takes to be genuinely human in an age of performance and perfection.